So the title of my talk is a bit long, 10 vegan things I changed my mind about in 20 years of activism. It could be 9 things, I didn't count them. You can ask your money back if it's not 10 but 9, I don't know.
I mean, we're 12 seconds in. I haven't paid a penny, and I've still got plenty of regrets already. I've intentionally sped up the next couple of minutes just because it's really boring, to be perfectly honest, and not relevant to what we're going to be discussing. It's just kind of him setting the scene and talking about his history, his past, and that he had a burnout potentially because he was finding opposition when speaking to people about veganism. Go figure. So just to give you the false premise that we're about to work off for the rest of the speech, essentially because he wasn't having much success speaking to non-vegans, vegan education don't work. Just so we're clear.
I recently put this message on my Facebook. When people tell me they're not sure they agree with me, then I usually tell them I'm not sure I agree with what I'm saying either. And a lot of people appreciate that. I mean, you see the likes, right?
Yeah, 100 plus likes, 11 comments, smashing it, Tobias, absolutely smashing it.
But my best friend, the chief commissioner of the vegan police, he quoted me. He quoted this and he said, like, if you need a reason to not to listen to anything the misnomered vegan strategist says, then this has to be it. If he doesn't agree with what he is saying, why is he saying it? Maybe he's getting paid. So you see, not everybody appreciates doubt, and people actually want you to be sure of that.
Well, yeah, you kind of have to see their point. I mean, it's totally different. Like, I'm doing this and I'm stating my opinion and I'm kind of giving you what I think and my version of the information, but I'm not charging any money for it. So that's the difference. It's okay to be wrong, and it's okay to sort of have doubts in yourself and think that you're not right about everything. That's absolutely fine. But don't charge people money then to listen to those opinions and those thoughts and those feelings. In the same sense that I can't play piano. So it's okay for me to talk about the piano and talk about a piano or even talk about some music, in fact, but I shouldn't be charging anyone for my piano lectures. I shouldn't be charging anyone for my piano knowledge. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Like, that's the point they're trying to make, and it's like, whoa.
But I think that, yes, there is definitely value in being very confident and very sure and feeling very empowered. There is value in that, particularly in a situation like this when it's us against the rest of the world, right? We should be sure of ourselves, enough sure of ourselves. But then on the other hand, I see too many people in this world being too sure of themselves. And I guess you know what that looks like. You know, too many people being too sure of themselves, something like this. You know what it looks like on Facebook when we are too sure of ourselves, and when we are sure that our opinion is the right one, we just fight, right? And I guess ultimately being entirely convinced that you are right without any question, without any shadow of a doubt, can lead to really bad things, right? And so I'm worried sometimes that people in our movement are a bit too sure of themselves.
The sad irony here is that Tobias actually is so sure of himself, and him and Melanie Joy and Seb Joy and the others in their little crony pack, they're so sure of themselves, and they're so sure that they understand this movement better than the people that founded it, the pioneers that helped shape it through the next decades afterwards, or even any of the philosophers that have ever sort of dedicated their lives to it. They apparently understand this better than all of them, which is why they want to dilute it and change it and redefine it. And they also think that this so-called research gives them the justification to do so. But they've got doubts about themselves, obviously. Don't forget that part.
And I would like to say that also within the vegan movement, some doubt is a good thing. Why is it a good thing? Because, well, we might be mistaken. This is a very complicated world. We know every day we know more about the world.
What part of opposing oppression and exploitation are we possibly getting wrong?
and every day we can be found, our knowledge may be found outdated. We are subject to groupthink. We are often thinking what the other people in our group think. We sometimes dare not to think differently. I mean, we are vegan, we think differently from this whole carnivorous, carnistic world, of course, but are we thinking independently enough inside our movement? We are part very much of an ideology, of a system ourselves. And also another reason is that we ask other people to change their minds. We ask other people to be open-minded and to doubt what they're eating, etc. So we should do the same. And thirdly is a pragmatic reason.
Again, another sad irony that the entire movement apparently is getting this wrong. And I mean, I'm not going to argue in some senses that the big portions of them are, but you know, everybody that's challenged Tobias and the rest of ProVeg have never actually been considered. They've never actually been sort of listened to, and their opinions been considered valid or any of that criticism taken on board. So, I mean, it's all right saying don't be closed-minded, but sort of practice what you preach in that sense, because you're not only saying vegan education doesn't work because it didn't work for me. That's the first false premise. But then you're refusing to listen to anyone that says, well, it works for me, by saying, wow, no, the researcher said it can't work for you. Like, I don't understand how you can ask people to be open-minded whilst having a closed mind.
We can actually be more convincing if we seem less convinced. Research has shown that, like for presenters, for instance, people standing in front of you like I do, that if now and then I say I'm not sure of that, I have to look this up, then you will trust me more than when I pretend to have all the answers, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously some sincerity and integrity about saying, look, I don't know the answer to that, let me do some research and get back to you, other than making something up or assuming or pretending. But at the same time, let me give you some examples. So I don't know the ins and outs of the subsidy system in this country, but I know that oppression and exploitation are wrong in every way, shape and form, and there's never going to be an exception to that, potentially. So there's going to be things that I can brush up on. There's going to be things that I can research better to understand better, like the subsidy system, for example. But that's not challenging what veganism stands for. That's not challenging what I'm opposed to. That part's never in doubt. That part's never in question. There's no extra research needed. Like, why are you misleading people, especially as your audience are vegan? Why are you misleading them into thinking that that part could come under some sort of scrutiny or question somewhere? Why? How?
Illustrated sometimes with this ad. Some people may know this ad. Carlsberg, the best beer in the world. You can see that I deleted one word. Do you know what it is? Yes. The original ad is probably. And it's a much more interesting and more convincing ad with that little bit of doubt added there, I think. So what I'm talking about is to be open-minded, and to be open-minded means that now and then you will actually change your mind, or changing your mind is a sign that you are open-minded. And so I think that's really necessary, also especially in this movement, even when we think we're very sure of everything. So we have to basically constantly update ourselves. We have to be like Windows, right? This is very annoying when I see more and more of this, but
again, totally agree. When new information becomes available, then yeah, it factors into our decision making and how we perceive things. But again, practice what you preach. How many people need to challenge you and tell you that you're getting this wrong before you reconsider, before you use your open mind to take another look at this? Also, why have you watermarked that? Isn't that like copyright of Windows?
you have to be constantly updating yourself for the Mac people so that they don't feel left out.
Well, I'm guessing he's a fan or a supporter of fair use.
Update yourselves. Okay. So let me ask you, are there any vegan or animal rights issues that you change your mind about? You don't have to tell me the answer today, but you can ponder that in your bed or in your bath tonight. No, I guess you won't be taking a bath tonight.
The hotels not have baths in Luxembourg, But anyway, so yeah, absolutely there are. There's loads of stuff that I was once upon a time thought that I was right about and then corrected myself. That's the really key part here. Like I've been down the same route that you have, Tobias. I've experienced burnout many times, but I've never questioned veganism. I've just sought to understand it better, and each time that I have, it's made everything make sense easier. It's made the goal reachable, so to speak. Yeah, it's still a million miles away. I'm not pretending that it isn't. But the more that I understand, the more that it makes sense. The more that you choose not to understand, the less that it will make sense.
But you can ponder that at some point, and really think about if you ever change your mind about something. I'll tell you about some stuff that I changed my mind about. So the first thing is that I used to think that we are the only ones with a clear view on things. Let me explain what I mean with that. If you look at the industry, the people who produce the meat, they have billions and billions of advertising money, and they throw ads at us telling us that it's good to eat meat, but we all know that it is just a message that they're sending out because they want to make a profit, because they're greedy, because they want to make money. And we are...
yeah, marketing. You know, where people basically say whatever they can or want to, or what the public are willing to hear, essentially for money. Yeah, you know a bit about that, right?
Completely different, right?
Yeah, sorry, my bad. That's nothing like what you do at all.
We have this very clear goal of creating a vegan world, and we do that for the animals, and that's it. That's our agenda, right? We are not into it for profit, etc.
Well, that's the focus, yeah. There's also a scope, but you don't pay too much attention to that, I suppose. But no, I mean, you're right. The vast majority of us don't do this for profit. In fact, the vast majority of us don't do this for any gain at all, other than we want the world to be a better place for all. Funny.
Yet still, I think we have to be careful. I once opened a fortune cookie, and there was a message in there. And the message said, "Remember, no one is immune to bias." The reason I made a picture of it was that first I thought that this fortune cookie knew my name, you know. No one is immune to bias. I was freaked out. But the message, no one is immune to bias, is a very important one. And we can very well examine our own biases, especially when we're not talking about the animals. When we are talking about health, for instance, or the environment, we have to really seriously wonder, is our pro-animal bias or pro-vegan bias playing some role here? Right?
Yeah, I mean, we also have to ask the question, is a pro-career bias playing a role here? Is a pro-pension, pro-benefit, pro-luxury, pro-privilege playing a role here? Because, I mean, there's a reason that certain people aren't charging money and you are. There's a reason that people like me, for example, are getting nothing at all out of challenging this just because we care, whereas you are making a good living out of diluting it.
Right? You may know that many people have said that this documentary is vegan propaganda and is exaggerated, gives an exaggerated message.
So I wouldn't necessarily refer to What the Health as a vegan film anyway. It's a plant-based film, which is obviously quite helpful for the health and diet side of things, but that's pretty much all it pretends to be. But the only people that I've ever heard accuse it of being vegan propaganda are the people that haven't watched it.
This, I think, in itself is kind of like suffering from vegan bias. I mean, you can, I think, be an environmentalist and eat meat. There's people who do wonderful things for the environment and who are not vegan.
Yeah, but you're intentionally missing the point. Even if you do some wonderful things for the environment, if you're not vegan, you're also doing some absolutely atrocious things to it. So where's this balance? Are the amazing things you're doing for the environment outweighing all of the oppression and devastation that you're causing? Probably not. So it's kind of irrelevant. You'd actually be far... I mean, why wouldn't you encourage these people to be vegan as well?
Right. So that's always something to be careful about. And even when we look at what we do or what is happening to animals, we might have a bias in the sense that we might have this abolitionist bias. We are all in favor of abolishing the whole system so that we can't even see improvements in welfare, for instance. I'll come back to that in a minute.
I wish you wouldn't, to be perfectly honest, of all the things that you could talk about. But whilst I remember, that's another thing that once upon a time I was wrong about. I used to think that welfare worked.
So the point here is, or another way to put it is, you have freed yourself from the carnistic box, and good for you, congratulations. You jumped out of the carnistic box, but just make sure you don't end up in the vegan box and you keep having an open mind.
15 seconds and you said so much wrong. So the other box should be speciesism. I don't know what carnism is, for example. That's a vegetarian concept that we don't need to worry about in any way, shape or form. I know it's your branding, I know you keep trying to sell it, but it's irrelevant to veganism. That's not the opposite. Speciesism is, we have a word, it works perfectly, stop trying to change it. But please, everybody listening to this, remember who Tobias's audience is. The people that are listening to this at the festival are all, for the most part, vegan or vegan curious at the very least, and he's telling them not to get stuck in the vegan box. I mean, and charging money, by the way, and they're paying to listen to this.
So rather than thinking that we are the only ones with a clear view, I now believe that we're much more biased actually than we think. And we have a wonderful and a beautiful message that can be very convincing. Let's bring it in the right way. Let's not exaggerate it, because our message and our case in itself is strong enough without us adding fantasy.
The irony is so deep that it could be mined. Yeah, the direct opposition to the exploitation of all sentient life. Pretty simple stuff, yeah? You don't need to dilute it any more than that, but the only person doing so and encouraging people to change their already established views on veganism is you.
To it. The second one is that I used to believe it all depends on us. I was thinking like, oh my God, all these animals suffering. We are the vegans, such a small group, but it's up to us to change that. We are the only ones who want to change that, and we are the only ones who can and will change that. And unfortunately, I was wrong with that. It's not just us.
No, you were right the first time. There is no justice, there is just us. Obviously all of these people can be ripened up, and that's the plan. The plan is to make more vegans and change the world to be vegan to the point that one day the word doesn't need to exist, because that's normality. But the plan is to educate people so that they stop doing the things that they're already doing. Not say, well, carry on doing the things that you're doing, but reduce them a little bit. Because that's not going to bring the world that we want. That's going to perpetuate the world that's going to shit, basically, just at a slower rate. All you're going to do is make it at a more gradual pace. You're not going to stop anything. So why would we want to adopt that worldview?
There's the vegan movement, yes, but we've been joined by so many planet and health organizations, sustainability and health organizations, who also talk about reducing meat consumption. And more recently, we've been joined by a lot of companies, businesses. Maybe they're in the business for making money.
I'm not really sure how I can put this any simpler than, unless they genuinely join us, i.e. become vegan, then they're not joining us. They're opposing us. They're standing in the way of what we want. They're contributing and perpetuating and demanding all the things that we stand against. It may be in smaller quantities, but all the same. So no, until they go vegan, they haven't joined us. They can sort of skirt around it, but they're still contributing to the things that we directly oppose until they go vegan.
But they are really helping us a lot by, for instance, selling, even just at the beginning of this year, 25 million pieces of just one burger. Can you imagine 25 million burgers being sold? What kind of an impact that has? Or here's another example. Of all the milk being sold in the world today, 13% is already plant-based milk. That is not just our work.
Well, no, of course it's not, but I don't think that we were ever pretending that it was. I mean, just in the milk sense, obviously anyone that's lactose intolerant drinks a plant-based milk. There's lots of people that just do it now potentially because they prefer the taste or the price. So there's many other factors that are also influencing this change. But what difference does that make? Does that make we don't need to educate people about veganism because they've already started buying a plant-based milk because they find it cheaper than cow milk? I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by this. I've never seen anyone make the claim that all of these changes everywhere are the result of vegans. That's clearly not the case. And a lot of these things, in fact, a lot of these products existed before a huge surge of veganism. So whilst numbers were still quite small, these products existed just for the Jewish community, for example. So like, I'm not entirely sure what point you're trying to make.
That's not just the result of vegan advocacy. That's the result of also people talking about health, people talking about the planet. That's the result of businesses developing great alternatives for milk, etc. So it's not just us alone, but we are important. We, the vegan movement, we try to tell people that it is unethical to consume animal products. The organizations in the field of sustainability and health want to show that it's unsustainable, both for health and the environment, and business is trying to make these animal products just redundant, and we have to work in tandem with them together.
No, they have to work in tandem with us. This is about ethics. This isn't about numbers in terms of, or who cares, we've got enough people. This is about ethics. This really is. So no, they work with us, not the other way round. We don't compromise on ethics. They change theirs to suit, or it don't work.
So rather than believing it all depends on us, I now believe that we are one important part of it. This should be a relief. It's not just us. We are a big movement, but we're at the same time a small movement, you know? And it's really good that we get help from all these other parts of society.
Yeah, by ripening them up and educating them and turning them vegan.
Number 3, what I believed is that it's all about personal change. If you want to look good and wise, you quote Gandhi, so I'll do that. Be the change that you wish to see in the world. You all know that quote, and it sounds so beautiful and it sounds so great. But that is not the whole story. Personal change, that's about this.
No, it's not the only way, but it's a really important factor. I mean, you won't ever achieve system change without individual change, and that individual change has to be based on something more than just, I did my bit. Like, there has to be something there to keep it there, like morality. So yeah, it is important, really important, that people change personally, because how are we ever going to influence government, for example, unless we've got enough people that have already changed their minds and ripened up to the idea, so that we've got the numbers to form a government, for example? How are you hoping to propose these changes otherwise? Oh wait, I forgot, you're not. That's the problem.
You want to make people climb uphill so that they tip the system, and you motivate them.
Yeah, nothing more motivating than telling a vegan to stop being too vegan.
You make them aware, and you try to motivate them mainly by moral arguments to change personally in their behavior, in their diet. And that's what we mean when we say, like, it's not a diet, it's not a phase, it's a permanent lifestyle change.
Yeah, but it's not a big change to anything radical like you're making out. You're actually losing the radicalness. You're actually making your actions and your morals in line with one another. So yeah, I mean, it's a fairly huge change in terms of how you think and how you perceive the world, but only for the better. Why would you want people not to enlighten themselves in that way? Even if there wasn't any benefits to the non-human animals, say, why would you still not encourage that for people, just so that they treated other people better?
It's a personal change, it's a lifestyle change that is very important in our eyes. Let me give you an example of something that points to something else that could also be very useful. There was a poll recently, last year, I think, in the United States, where they asked people if they would be in favor of banning slaughterhouses in the US. Are you in favor of closing all the slaughterhouses? You know? And half of the people said yes. Half of the people said, yes, let's close all the slaughterhouses. And the people organizing the poll were so surprised that they made a follow-up question, and they asked, Were you aware that slaughterhouses where livestock are killed and processed into meat such that without them you would not be able to consume meat? Were you aware of that? Just checking. And actually most were, but quite a few were not. You wonder where these people think that meat comes from.
Well, I mean, I'm going to give you the benefits of the doubt on numbers and all this stuff for this survey, just so that it kind of remains relevant. But if I went round and surveyed everyone in the UK and said, do you want to carry on testing on beagles? Who would say yes? Nobody. Like, when you ask someone a direct question like that, yeah. But do you want to continue consuming animals? Yeah, they still do. Or do you want to continue still painting your nails with this particular product? Yeah, they still do. So that's where the conflict comes, and you're not addressing that in any way, shape or form. Like, yeah, loads of people probably do want to close slaughterhouses down, but they still also want to use animals because they don't even realise necessarily that those things are connected, as 25% of that poll has said. Why wouldn't we take that information on board and say they need educating, rather than going, this is too much for them? Yeah, they need educating, not give up. They need educating. Like, that's what the evidence is telling us. They need to be educated, not, they can't be educated, which is what you're coming to the conclusion of.
But the point here is that even after checking for that, there was a significant amount of people still in favor of closing all the slaughterhouses, much more than the number of vegans. And what does this mean?
Yeah, there's millions and millions and millions more people in support and in favour of women's rights than just feminists. I mean, because they understand the commonalities of the oppression. I mean, again, this evidence tells us that if we made people understand that there's no difference between our species and oppression and exploitation and use, and these just extend in exactly the same way that people already oppose sexism, racism, anything else. If we made them understand that and we educated them, then not only would they potentially change their minds about what they're doing and how they act, but they would stick with it because it would be the morality that shifted as opposed to just a trend, which is what you're trying to sell them.
I think it means that people might be very open to change if they're not the only ones changing. If there's an institutional change, if there's, for instance, a law that says you all have to do this, then many people might say, like, look, I didn't want to do it just by myself. I don't want to be the sucker to give this up. But if everybody has to do it, I'll go along. You understand? So maybe...
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. The problem is prohibition doesn't work. The evidence proves this time and time again. That's why education is the way forward. Because if you take something away from people without making them understand why, they will still want it and they will still find ways to seek it and use it and do it. It will just go underground. If anything, potentially the rights violations and the cruelty that everyone is so potentially concerned about will get worse. Imagine like, slaughterhouses are bad enough, right? We can't see what goes on for the most part and all that stuff. But imagine this was happening in people's back gardens and their basements and like in random warehouses because it was prohibited. Like, it wouldn't stop. It would just go underground. So, yeah, we know this evidence doesn't work. I mean, you're a big fan of research, Tobias. Like, do some.
To give an example that you could better understand or apply, suppose you might say, like, look, I'm in favor of paying more taxes. Paying more taxes maybe just for developmental aid, right? But you might not just do that by yourself. But when the government would say everybody now has to pay an extra 5% taxes that will go to developmental aid, you might say, yes, I'm totally in favor of that. Let's all do it.
Yeah, absolutely, this is true. I mean, every time there's been a tax increase or a cost of living crisis, there's people that are absolutely overjoyed at the fact that they can give a little bit more money to the government.
That, right? So that's institutional change, or that's one example. So rather than just encouraging people to climb that hill here, we attach like an institutional weight here and we change the whole thing. We make the slide less steep at first, and in the end we can make it so that actually it becomes the way of least resistance and people just slide down.
Wow, so it's a nice little picture thing, but there's a couple of problems. First, both your examples are essentially the same example. They're both prohibition, essentially being forced into doing something. So again, the evidence suggests quite strongly that doesn't work. But secondly, where is this weight coming from, i.e. the prohibition, without individual change? How are you going to bring in a government or an organisation with enough power to add a weight onto this potential scale in the way you're describing without the individual change that comes before that? Because you encouraging people to go halfway isn't going to add a weight onto that scale. You're going to get people that think they're vegan that aren't, but that's not going to bring us a vegan world. That's going to bring us a halfway world, which again, as we talked about earlier, that's not stopping or abolishing anything. That's just slowing the pace, which is better, of course it's better, but it's not the solution. Veganism as it is, as it was intended, is the solution.
You know, even the people who didn't want it just go with the flow, go where the majority goes. So rather than believing it's all about personal change, I now believe that personal change is very hard without institutional change. Personal change is something that only a percentage of the people will do, percentage of the population will do. And we are among that percentage, but not everybody will. And we can try to talk to them and try to morally motivate them till the cows come home.
So this is a speech that Tobias has done a couple of times. It was obviously scripted, written down and then rehearsed. Why would you include a clearly speciesist phrasing or expression?
Right? But they still might not change, and they might need other things to change.
Yeah, their speciesism being addressed and being educated on the subject. That's what needs to change. Yeah, their understanding.
The fourth one is veganism is the answer. You might be surprised, is it not, Dan? Well, of course, it's a big part of the solution, but maybe sometimes we are overemphasizing it.
No, you're intentionally misunderstanding it so that you can sell your veganish brand.
And I think this poster that was photographed at an animal rights conference in the United States shows it very nicely. What the animals need. It's not celebrities, it's not the liberal media, it's not lettuce bikinis, sure. It's not vegetarianism, but it's not even donations, it's not even yoga, it's not even compassion or love or petitions, and it's certainly not Peter Singer. What the animals need here, according to this picture, is veganism.
Whoever paid for that banner, whoever designed that banner, you are an absolute legend. The first time that I ever saw that, I loved it. The fact that Tobias hates it means that I love it even more. Like, please never stop being you.
And you see the incredible confidence and the incredible weight we attach to veganism. And I used to think that too when I was always trying to convince everybody around me to go vegan, until I realized that, many people are not going to do that, but
yeah, everyone that fully understands the philosophy understands that veganism is the solution. Even you, until you realize that there was a few quid to be made and a little bit something else by reducing it down and meeting people halfway, because there's less resistance then, right?
Every serious effort that people makes them part of the solution. Some people say, like, if you're not vegan, you're part of the problem. I would say, well, if you make enough effort, you help increase demand, and that will create more vegan options, and then so you're part of the solution. So everything below vegan, I mean some things below vegan at least, like being veganish.
I don't know whether that was like timed purposely or what, but effective vegan communication, reduce everything that the philosophy stands for down to, as you say, veganish. Yeah, like, so not vegan then. I mean, imagine this way. Imagine like you looked at it in this situation. You've got a serial killer going around, and instead of telling them to stop killing people, you tell them to reduce the amount of people that they kill. That's what you're encouraging, essentially. I just don't understand. This talk would be bad enough if this was to an audience of non-vegans. The fact that this is to already established vegans is criminal, to be perfectly honest. But I suppose when you pay for the event, you can do what you want.
Or being a vegetarian or whatever, that's all very...
Being vegetarian should be seen as a stepping stone and literally nothing else.
Helpful too, and the way I would like to say it is with the words of a zero waste chef, and maybe you've seen this. We don't need a handful of people doing zero waste perfectly, we need millions of people doing it imperfectly, right? And so we're so focused on having a small group of people doing it perfectly, but we forget the impact of a much bigger group of people doing it imperfectly.
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about recycling or whatever, I mean, I suppose that there's a case there that there's an argument to be made. When we're talking about innocent sentient beings having their heads chopped off, no, there's no argument there, Tobias.
I don't know exactly how the numbers are, but I like to think of it something like this. If we can make 70% of the people 70% vegan, the rest will take care of itself. The rest will go vegan. They will go more vegan and the world will become vegan. If we have this critical mass, this may be 80%, maybe 60%, I don't know. But
they've done studies, 60% of the time it works every time.
That doesn't make sense.
I don't know, but the point is, it doesn't have to be perfect right away for everybody. So rather than believing that veganism is the answer, I think sometimes we're focusing too much on it.
Or might it be that a big part of the problem is that 95% of the world aren't focusing on it at all?
Animal rights are what matters, is what I believed, or the only thing that matters. And you all know the difference between welfare and rights, right?
I haven't seen a lot of evidence to suggest that you do, to be perfectly honest, but you just said believed, not believe. So you no longer believe in animal rights.
And we are all on the side of the rights. We're all, I think, abolitionists, in the sense that we want to stop the use of animals, the exploitation of animals, the injustice against animals.
I have no evidence at all that anyone representing the opposition has read so much as a single page of this philosophical work.
And I think it's very clear what the difference is with the people who just want to improve the welfare and would keep these animals in existence and make things just a bit better. And I think there is a really big difference, and we have to be aware of that difference, and we can make people aware of that difference. But the point is not to throw out the baby with the bathwater and to say that all reforms in terms of animal welfare are useless. We want to stop this, of course, we want to stop this from happening. But if some people are helping it change into something like this, it would be not so wise, I think, to deny the difference between.
Would you be happy with that, though? Would you be happy with still being exploited and oppressed and used as long as your treatment was improved? Because the thing is that you're misleading people with, again, is you're making out that the abolitionist position is an all or nothing position when it's absolutely not the case. And actually, on the road to abolition, you will get handed better welfare reforms as potential compromises than you ever would campaigning for individual welfare reforms by themselves. This is proven fact. Welfare potentially hasn't changed anything in 200 years. We exploit more animals now than at any point ever. So I don't think anyone completely dismisses the fact that welfare improvements would be a benefit. What they dispute is the fact that the route of going down should be an abolitionist one, and welfare will come along the way, hand in hand, so to speak, whereas going down a welfare route will only ever achieve welfare.
Between these two systems, it would not be wise to deny the difference between this and this. And this is not me talking about or me being an apologist and saying that better meat is okay, but it is about taking into account well-being, taking into account welfare, and not spitting on the work of the people who are basically waging welfare campaigns. Like many organizations are doing. They're probably doing.
Yeah, that's not actually happening, and potentially with the same merit and the same strength, you could easily just argue that actually the welfarists are spitting in the face of the abolitionists, and also, which is really key here, the actual victims in the situation. See, it's really easy to accept deals and compromises and baby steps when you're not the victim yourself.
A great job in making people more aware, in getting people closer to caring for animals and caring enough so that in the end they might say, well, I care so much about their welfare now, why should I actually use them? Why should I eat them?
Yeah, that's not how it works at all. The evidence completely suggests the opposite. Actually, the higher the welfare standards, the more comfortable people feel about exploiting others. If they think that they pay a little bit of extra money and that alleviates them of the risks involved, so to speak, the cruelty, the oppression, the exploit, however you want to label it, that's what they think, then actually welfare does the opposite of what you're telling people it does. It makes people more comfortable where they are and they don't move.
So rather than thinking that animal rights are what matters or are the only thing that matters, I believe that well-being is important too, and that organizations and people who are doing campaigns for welfare, for increasing welfare, for welfare reforms, are very important as well.
The fact that you don't think that animal rights already encompasses well-being makes me think that you don't understand what animal rights are.
I used to believe that it is mainly about righting our own wrongs, making the things right that we are the cause of, that are bad that we are the cause of. So obviously we created this horrible system and we have to solve it. I'm going to show a slightly sad picture now that you probably all have seen. This is a polar bear, and she is too weak to find food. She's walking around here and she can't find food and she's hungry. And this picture has gone all over the world, and people said or used this as a demonstration of the consequences of climate change. Do you remember? And there was one biologist who's an expert in polar bears, and he said, well, actually, this is not the consequence of climate change. This is the way that these animals just die in the wild. Whether there's climate change, whether there's people or not, this is the way they die. They just at some point get old and weak and they cannot find food anymore.
This is actually completely true, and probably not only the most, I want to say the most honest thing, because I think that he's been honest with some of the things that he said, but probably the most beneficial thing that he said so far during the talk, in terms of accurate, in terms of actually teaching people anything of any importance or worth.
They're too weak for that, right? We think that many animals might die of old age in nature, but just dying of old age doesn't really exist. It always comes with a lot of complications.
Well, I mean, essentially it's the same for humans. Just dying of old age per se doesn't really happen. There's always some complication or problem or ailment or issue somewhere along the line, whether it's diagnosed or not.
The point here is that I think that what matters is suffering.
Yeah, people are absolutely focused on suffering, and that's a big part of the problem. If only they could actually focus on the rights violations and the exploitation involved, where there was none in that polar bear picture. But the problem is, if you show them like a dairy cow, they don't see any suffering unless it's a particularly bad treatment, like conditions-wise, in terms of where they're stood or all that sort of stuff. Or it's a photo of them being directly assaulted. Then they see a cruelty, then they see suffering. But in the act of stealing milk, no, they don't. Because that's kind of like, well, that's the way that milk is created, so to speak. That's the way that it goes from cow to fridge. So they understand that process, and they only look for unnecessary suffering. Whereas if we made them understand that the problem is actually the use, it's the fundamental wrong, i.e. the rights being violated, then we wouldn't have to worry about suffering. And even in circumstances like you've suggested before, where they were given a better life, better treatment, more space, all of this stuff, it would still be wrong, and they'd understand that, rather than constantly looking for ways to improve their oppression.
And it doesn't matter so much. It makes a difference, but it ultimately doesn't matter so much whether we created that suffering or nature created that suffering. I want to care also about this animal, right, who is suffering because of nature, not because of us. And in nature we know, and there's been talks here before at this conference about the topic wild animal suffering.
So hang on, you want to infringe upon and interfere with a polar bear that could have lived a life of 20 years in the wild, but you want to make allowances for people to continue consuming what you would consider farm animals. Make it make sense.
Wild animal welfare. We know that in the wild, animals suffer from all kinds of things like starvation and disease and predation and all kinds of things. And you just have to realize that when an animal has a toothache or loses a limb or something, they won't be helped by a doctor in the wild, right? So it is something that at some point we have to start caring about too, and I'm sure that in the future technology may help us find solutions. In any case, this creature, suppose it's living in freedom, it has all the rights that you want to give it.
Stop referring to them as it first, and secondly, I mean, what do you propose in this situation? Some sort of fountain of youth? I mean, You literally answered it at the beginning by saying this is what happens when they essentially get to their old age peak. So what are you proposing that we could, what technology are you proposing that we could use in this situation, unless it's some sort of immortality?
But what are rights without well-being, right? We want to care for their well-being as well, not just about their freedom and their autonomy. So rather than thinking it's just about righting our own wrongs, I think we should care about the wild animals also. Maybe the most
yeah, the best thing that potentially we can do for free living beings is just leave them alone. Especially if we started reducing the amount of land that we use to feed so many animals, for example, and started rewilding. Not only would they have huge amounts of space now to live in away from us, but potentially just leaving them alone and not causing them problems, whether that's intentionally or unintentionally, would make an enormous difference.
Controversial point where I changed my mind, or I am in the process of changing my mind, is the idea, which I used to think, that no form of domestication is ever okay. I made exception, and I still make exception for companion animals, dogs and cats. I don't think that's necessarily wrong. And there's many dogs here. They give us so much love. We give so much love.
You don't think breeding dogs to essentially serve human beings is wrong? Yeah, I'm not surprised.
To them, it doesn't necessarily need to be wrong. But I know that some people would want to question that as well. What I'm talking about here is basically this old question that is asked by meat eaters: what would happen to all the animals if the world went vegan? You know, what's going to happen then if all the world goes vegan? And some people say, well, that's obvious. If all the world goes vegan, then animals will take over the world.
Well, not in your dreams, Tobias, because the world will only be veganish.
Right? That's probably not going to happen.
Probably won't happen.
What is more likely to happen is that many animals might go extinct. And
not necessarily at all. I mean, potentially, if they could, what's the best way to describe this? Regress in terms of evolution, undo all of the horrible things that humanity has done to them, and potentially adapt again to survive naturally in the world, then there's no reason that would happen. But even if potentially a long way down the road that was the case, and that was the situation we'd be in, then we'd only be talking about a few select species, or even breeds of species, not even necessarily species. Like, we wouldn't be talking about the clade of bovine. We'd be talking about a few breeds of cow that we'd no longer have, for example. Cows would still exist.
Maybe that's not entirely true, but the thing is that I've started to think about what does a vegan world actually look like in terms of the animals that will be around.
Well, your version is pretty much the same as the world that we've got now. We just don't exploit quite as many animals.
Right? And it's actually a good sign that I, or maybe you too, can ask this question, because it means that maybe this vegan world is getting closer and closer. And at some point we'll have to ask, okay, we are going to achieve this. What is it going to look like in terms of animals? Let me show you very briefly which categories of beings are around on this planet. One way to categorize them is this: there are people, right? There are pets, and I know companion animals is the politically correct term, but it didn't fit in the circle, so I write pets.
It's not political correctness, it's anti-speciesism, which you should understand and be against. But if that's the case, why not just put CA and then explain like you just did? I mean, you've just literally explained, so you might as well have just put that acronym or those initials and not conform to speciesism.
There are the farmed animals, and don't pay attention too much to the size of the circles. Farmed animals, of course. There are also the wild animals.
Absolutely no problem this time with the lack of space. He's chosen, vegan audience again, remember, bear in mind this the whole way through watching this, vegan audience, to call them farm animals and wild animals. Great.
And then there's also a category that we call the liminal animals. Have you heard of them? Liminal animals are the animals living on, they're not wild, they're not domesticated, but they're living in between. They are using the leftover food from people or the trash from people. So they're like pigeons and rats and those kind of animals.
Right, so still free living beings. They still fall into the same category as your wild animals.
Right? And then there's a very, very small category of animals, and they are the animals living on sanctuaries. Animals like these, right? And so now the question is, if you look at this picture, what would remain? Which groups would remain in a vegan world?
I know you said pay no attention to the size of the circles, but if you're going to make sanctuary animals that small, then you are sort of drawing attention to the fact that they are the smallest percentage. You even pointed that out. So why have you put free living beings as the biggest percentage when that would definitely be farmed animals by a significant amount?
So I think that, first of all, of course, we want to get rid of the farmed animals. They would be more or less gone. Some people might want to get rid of the pets as well, not the companion animals. Not everybody would want that. We would also, in the end, get rid of animals in sanctuaries, because if there's no farmed animals anymore, there would be no overflow anymore to sanctuaries, I guess. And
I really dislike the term get rid. That's definitely not the plan. The plan is for them to not be bred into existence. That's the plan. But hey, you know, the problem that you were worried about earlier, like what happens if a fox has a toothache? Hey, that's a good reason to still have sanctuaries, right? Even if we're not using them to rescue animals from oppression, we could use them to rescue animals from other accidents or other problems that we could assist them with. There you go, problem solved with your own talk. I mean, you didn't make the connection, but no worries. You're welcome.
maybe we want to get rid of the liminal animals around us in our cities, etc. as well, and we want to keep only the wild animals.
What? So let's just stay in the liminal animals category for a moment. And who wants this? Who wants this? Non-vegans, yeah, probably. Bear in mind, again, to reiterate, this audience that he is speaking to are vegans, and he's potentially telling them and expecting agreement that, yeah, all the rats, all the pigeons, you know, fuck them. Who cares? You'll get rid of them. Who would? In a vegan world, we would be getting rid of free living beings. Like, what world is he imagining? And, you know, how in any way, shape or form does this comply with veganism?
But I just explained that animals in the wild don't necessarily have a very good life. So who do we want around? And you might say this is hubris, this is very arrogant of people to like decide who we want around on this planet, but I think it's going to happen anyway. We will, in the end, could be in the next 50 or 100 or 1,000 years, whatever, we will help decide which animals are here and which are not.
I honestly don't believe I sadly do believe what I'm hearing, but like, this is a talk to other vegans. Like, how has he not been heckled? How has someone not demanded their money back, like outright now, like screaming at him, like, what are you talking about? In this hypothetical vegan world, we're going to eliminate more animals than ever before, apparently, so that all that's left is humanity. Well, what about if we don't like some people of humanity? We're going to get rid of them too? We're going to continue exterminating humanity because some people don't have a very good life? I mean, what am I listening to?
And I started to think that, given that the situation in the wild is also not so wonderful all the time, that maybe...
Yeah, my life certainly isn't wonderful all the time. I'm not sure how many people could say theirs was. Should we get rid of us?
A situation where animals and humans can live together and help each other might be one of the best ways for animals to live on this planet.
Again, the best way to help them is to stop using them for any reason and to leave them alone.
Right? So if you look at what we can offer to animals, that is food and shelter and protection from predators and even medical care. That's all things that they don't get in the wild. And we could have animals around in a situation where they almost feel entirely free. They don't necessarily, I mean, we don't want to confine them, but we can imagine situations where they're almost, it feels as if they are free.
I really don't like where this is going.
And on the other hand, I mean, I think if we give this, if we offer this to animals, but they don't offer us anything in return,
So in this hypothetical vegan world, we still use animals, and if they don't serve a purpose, we get rid of them. This is worse than now.
Then there will be very few animals around, because it's not a give and take. You know, there would be only some sanctuaries where some very well-meaning people against the flow are putting a lot of money in saving a couple of animals. I just don't think that might not be the ideal situation. I think it might be good to have animals around us, that we continue to live with animals, and that we keep being compassionate with them and cultivate that compassion for other species, so that we can...
You understand that this is how this all once upon a time began, right? Like, so essentially your solution to this problem is to go back to the beginning and start doing exactly the same thing again. I'm lost for words.
Also learn to have compassion for the animals outside of our culture, the wild animals. And so it might be interesting if, while we give these things to them, animals may give some things to us, and there is a give and take, there's some kind of trade, and maybe that could be companionship.
You know, earlier when I said I don't think that you understand the difference between animal rights and animal welfare, here is the absolute smoking gun evidence of that.
But we could imagine sheep doing grazing for us, or maybe even we can have cows that are treated incredibly well, and we now and then take some cells from them, entirely harmless. They are living on sanctuaries or among us, and we take some cells for clean meat, no matter what you think of clean meat.
Or veganism, for that matter, like, at all. I mean, how can you charge people to listen to you speak when you haven't researched any of the subjects that you're speaking on? Or if you have, you've researched them and then disregarded everything that research told you.
They could give us manure, they could give us wool, maybe in some cases on a very small scale, they could give us some eggs. And the point here is that to think that every use is necessarily abuse is, I think, a mistake.
Right, well, let's bring back the slave trade. I mean, as long as we treat them well, right?
I mean, there can be, like I said, a give and take, and that is what I call a symbiosis.
Yeah, and it's what we call animal exploitation, and we're supposed to oppose it.
Living together, humans and animals, the problem is, of course, they cannot give consent to us. We cannot really know what they want, but maybe we can research that further. Anyway.
Well, yeah, the research in terms of biology says that they can't consent. That's not going to change ever. So it's either exploitation or we leave them alone.
This is something to think about further. I haven't reached any conclusion about that. The next one.
Haven't done any research, haven't reached any conclusion, but yet I'm pitching this idea to an audience full of vegans.
Second to last one is, I always thought, and I was brought up with the idea that I should care about money. Money I saw as something that was evil, that was the cause of everything that was wrong in the world. Until, and I was actually already 44 years old, so that's pretty late in my life, and I wish that you learn it faster, the ones who are younger than I am, that money is just a means to an end, and that we can use it to do a lot of good, and that in this world, whether we like it or not, we need money to do good, or we can use at least money to do good.
Yeah. What's really good is when you take money out of other vegans' hands to completely dilute the philosophy that they stand for. I mean, that really does the movement good.
So I think if you can use money wisely and save it and invest it in a nice way, etc., and have more money than you would otherwise have had, you can use that for donations. You can use that to do volunteer work for an entire year because you have a bit of a financial buffer, or to set up your own vegan business or whatever. So just don't ignore the importance of money. Don't think that it's noble not to have any.
Yeah, my advice would be don't ignore it, but also don't prioritize it. Don't pick your career over the cause.
Okay, and again I said, if you want to be good and wise, then quote Gandhi. I don't know if this is like an original quote or an apocryphal quote, but here the quote says, be the change you want to see in the world, and if you can't be that change, then either get out of the way of the person who wants to be that change, or support the individual with your financial resource.
Well, no, the quotes and the quotation marks, it's the same quote that you started the show off with earlier. and the rest has been added on. That's what quotation marks mean.
Right? Not sure if Gandhi ever said that, but the internet said
Yeah, who cares about accuracy? I'm still going to charge you for listening to it.
this. So, one last graph.
You have honestly no idea how glad I am to hear that.
This is the donations that, or the budgets of some big animal groups, 2014, 2016. You see how, for instance, Mercy for Animals grew from having a budget of $5 million to $12 million.
Yeah, great. All the welfare groups hoarded all the money that could be spent on actual grassroots activism to actually change something rather than just paying people to meet people halfway.
That is thanks to people giving money to them that they hopefully earned in an honest way.
Yeah, totally legit. You know, like doing a talk to vegans where you completely destroy everything that they believe in.
But thanks to these resources, Mercy for Animals and all these other groups can save a lot more animals. They can put people to work, they can get more staff, and they put more hours into saving animals.
See, if they just strengthened up their claims making and their messaging and actually promoted veganism as it is and as it's supposed to be, not your version, then they'd save more animals without spending any money.
Right? So instead of thinking that I shouldn't care about money, I now see money as a key to change. And then the last one, I used to think that it would take centuries, that it would take centuries for us to achieve our goal. When people asked me, maybe in interviews or something, will we ever stop consuming animal products? Will we ever stop eating meat? I said yes to that question, but inside I was thinking, yeah, very long-term science fiction things, right? In a couple of ages, we might all stop eating animals.
Yeah, well, if you're against educating people against doing it and happy to just let them pick up some litter or make a little bit of effort somewhere else, and that's okay, they can continue to oppress, then yeah, it is going to take eons and eons and eons, isn't it? But that's your whole motif. You want this slow tiptoe approach, so that is going to be what's happened. If you put all your time and money and effort into promoting abolition, which is apparently what you said you stood for, but have yet to see a single shred of evidence to support that, and a lot to the contrary, then we progress a hell of a lot further than you constantly diluting what people already think.
And I've seen so many things happening in just the last few years, or just the last few weeks. This is a pork giant creating plant-based alternatives and offering plant-based alternatives. Everybody is getting into this right now. And you might think this is a bad thing. I mean, I can understand your frustration. You might say, like, look, these horrible companies, they profited from the murdering and torturing of animals for such a long time. And now that it's finally profitable, they're going to also profit from selling alternatives. Yes, I can understand that's hard to accept. But I think that if you want to change things, you need these big players. And moreover, if you allow them to join our team and to sell plant-based products, then what happens is that there will be much less resistance to the vegan change and the vegan growth.
We already talked about this earlier, but to reiterate once again, no, they need to join with us. They're free to sell plant-based products, but that doesn't mean that they get to join the team. It doesn't give them membership to veganism without them going vegan. Like, their morality and their ethics have to change. They have to stop oppressing and exploiting, otherwise they don't qualify. That's kind of the rules. So they don't get to join just because they sell plant-based products. They don't need our permission to sell them. If they want to jump on the gravy train, so to speak, then that's how capitalism works. But that doesn't give them free entry to veganism.
Right? They will stop sabotaging us. They will stop resisting.
I've never said otherwise. Sure, we could. Even if they remain property, we could treat them better, but we don't. And we have had animal welfare laws for 200 years.
But that's very important. Here's another sign of the times. Do you know this? This was an ad for the Beyond Meat burger, and it was shown during the Super Bowl in the United States. So this is the most expensive advertising slot in the world, I think, and it was filled up partly by a vegan ad. Would you ever have dreamed this 10 years ago?
Would you ever believe that a company would pay money to have their product advertised in one of the best slots on the planet? Yeah.
I didn't. So what we're also seeing is, for the first time, people in mainstream media asking the question, will we stop eating meat at some point? More and more people, not vegans, not just vegans, are asking this question. And what's more and more people are starting to tentatively...
Yeah, but a whole bunch of those questions are being asked because of us, because we are growing.
reply to this in the affirmative.
Also, some quite good evidence that it's not too radical an idea after all, huh? And actually we can communicate this message to people without having to dilute it.
And not just vegans, but for instance, the CEO or the ex-CEO of Tyson Foods, one of the biggest meat companies in the world, saying the future of meat might be meatless, might be plant-based or clean meat.
You do understand how capitalism works, right?
So rather than thinking that it will take centuries, I'm now thinking that we may live to see it. Or at least you may live to see it. I'm a bit older, right? But you may live to see this change that we all want. Let me end by...
We're not a million miles away from having a veganish world now, and the world that you envisaged is anything but what we're trying to achieve, to be perfectly honest. It's one step backwards. So yeah, the ideal world, as I mentioned earlier, is one where the word vegan no longer exists, because we live in harmony and respect with one another naturally and normally, and we're finally civilized.
Going back to where I started, I said that some doubt is good, and I emphasize some doubt. Doubting too much is not good either, because you will end up in analysis paralysis. You will be paralyzed by analyzing and by hesitating and by doubting.
Could you not just apply a little bit of doubt and a little bit of analysis and just kind of reevaluate what you're doing?
This graph or picture says it all. You know, the time cost of strategy A, strategy B, and then analyzing which strategy you're going to follow. People who are familiar with effective altruism might be also familiar with this dynamic, that they spend too much time on thinking about what they're going to do. That's of course not good. So we have to have a certain degree of certainty, right? Also because I very much believe, and it is a bit disrespectful to some people maybe.
That hasn't stopped you at any other point in this video, don't worry.
But this philosopher, I think, tried to identified one of the biggest problems in the world, what he thought. And he said it like this: the whole trouble with the world is that the stupid are cocksure and the intelligent are full of doubt. Does that ring a bell? Can you recognize that in the world? That the people who are actually wise and intelligent, they have so much doubt because they know that the situation is more complicated. And the people who are less of an expert, they are so sure of themselves, even though their opinion is, with all due respect, bullshit, right?
Right, yeah, right. Literally the second most accurate thing you've said.
So, let me end by being a bit more certain. Let me end by saying what I do know for sure. I know for sure that what we are doing to farmed animals is terrible.
Other animals, and wrong, regardless of whether it's terrible or not.
There's no question about that. There's also no question that we don't need to do that.
Third thing, right, not even for symbiosis.
I also know for sure that more and more people are starting to realize that, and I trust that most people can find within them enough compassion to change. And most of all, what I'm sure of is that we are...
Only if they get full access to the information. If you dilute things down or discourage education, then they won't get there.
An incredible group of very committed, very dedicated individuals, people like you, who will not stop until this is over, who will not stop until we have this compassionate world.
Absolutely, we've got some incredible people in this movement, we've got some amazing activists, and hopefully none of them anywhere pay any attention to anything that you say.
Thank you very much.
Thank Dog that that's over, that's all I can say. I'm really sorry that you had to endure that as well as I did, but I'm also really sorry for anyone that was actually in the audience there that paid money to listen to that. I mean, that's something that we need to consider the entire way through this talk, that's who the audience are. That's who this speech was engineered for and written for and scripted for. So what are you trying to achieve with this? Why are you trying to reduce people's philosophy understanding? Why are you trying to reduce what the movement stands for? I mean, obviously there's financial and career benefits here, but the fundamental implications of what you're doing are enormous, and they completely, if anything, they stand in the way more so than the opposition in terms of non-vegans, because you're actually trying to take steps backwards for people that have already made the connection. You want them to make less effort than what they have. You want to tell them that they're being too vegan and that's too extreme. Like, that's a real problem.